Hello, welcome back to Fast Forward, our series of interviews that invite visionaries who truly care about employee experience and well-being to delve deeper into the future of work on the front line. From manufacturing and healthcare to retail and transportation, in each episode we'll be exploring how technology, automation and other trends are shaping the way over 2.7 billion people work on the front line. For today's episode, I'm very excited to welcome two special guests from Microsoft UK. Lina Huertas, Industry Executive for Manufacturing, and Sarah Miller, Product Marketing Manager, both of whom are committed to creating a more connected frontline through Microsoft technologies. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Luke.
Before we dive into the conversation, would you like to give a brief introduction about yourselves and your respective roles at Microsoft? Maybe we start first with you, Sarah.
Sure. So thanks for the introduction, Luke. I am a product marketing manager where my focus is on the frontline worker experience. So all day, every day, I think about how I can best empower frontline workers by connecting them digitally, helping them reduce stress, be more efficient, and feel more connected to their coworkers and their organization. And don't let my American accent fool you. I do live in the UK and I work with UK customers all day, every day. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. And Lina?
Thank you, Luke. I'll make the same disclaimer. My Spanglish is nothing to do with my Colombian origins. I am also in the UK, but I'm industry executive for Microsoft UK on manufacturing. And that means that I support all of our industry specific propositions. And that goes from engineering, factory, supply chain, all the way to product enablement and connected product, but actually is also very much focused on people. And we see people and frontline workers as a fundamental part of all of those narratives. And, people are ultimately what generates outcomes in each of these verticals. So frontline workers are also really important for us, particularly in the manufacturing background.
Awesome. Thank you. And I guess, both of you, your explanations for what you do in your roles was one of the main reasons I was so interested in speaking with you, but also, after reading Microsoft Work Trend Index report, which you published last January, which I think is definitely one of the most comprehensive studies into work trends on the front line that I've come across. I think there was over 9,000 frontline employees and managers from 5 different continents involved in that research. That was really sort of made me realize how much Microsoft were taking frontline seriously, and really sort of the most telling findings from that was around the growing culture and communications gap between corporate and the front line. And sort of with that research in mind and sort of everything that you've been involved with, at Microsoft, why do you feel that there is such a fractured communication, and why do you think it's so prevalent on the front line?
I'll take that one. I think historically, people haven't immediately understood the value that can be brought by connecting frontline workers, sort of bringing them into the fold. I think technology has advanced at such a rate that there are so many opportunities for not just efficiency, but higher work-life balance, higher work-life quality, that we're just sort of catching up. So it's almost like the technology jumped ahead so quickly that organizations suddenly can very easily see the value. And now it's a matter of getting that technology rolled out to their front line.
I would agree with that. And I think there's an element around, particularly in the manufacturing environment, traditional cultures. I think the cultural element plays a lot of that. And the whole topic around, for example, flexible working is very new. The whole topic around having people in a manufacturing environment, perhaps with a phone, and there are still concerns around health and safety, security, potentially distractions. And I think we still need to ramp up that learning curve that actually a lot of the technology and transformation in terms of frontline worker doesn't detract from some of these things, but actually can add and enable all of these things. So I think there's a strong, I suppose, cultural and heritage element, particularly in this sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously your focus on manufacturing Similar to ScreenCloud, really, we've got quite a few manufacturing customers all over the world, and we really trying to help them improve the flow of information, because it really is challenging for frontline as a whole. But in manufacturing, I think, some of the stats that I've come across most recently, in the US in particular, employee engagement is 8% lower than the US average at just sort of 25%. Turnover of frontline managers in the industry who, organizations really depend on for an information cascade definitely too heavily. There's 20% higher turnover than other industries. And also, I think something else is that sort of concern for the industry, and definitely some of the customers we've spoken to in manufacturing, is that the workforce is typically an older and aging workforce. So I think, again, in the US, the average age of the workforce is 55 years and over, which could mean that, in about 2030, I believe it was, that could mean there'd be a shortfall of sort of over 2 million workers. So, I mean, Lena, as someone that's worked in manufacturing innovation for, I think, 15 years, the pandemic clearly exacerbated some of these challenges. But, is it just the pandemic to blame, or have there been any other sort of major catalysts that you foresee in these challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, I think that there's quite a lot there. I mean, in terms of talent, we observed the two things that you're saying. Obviously, the pandemic completely changed and challenged some of the ways in which we work. And that has brought on, in composition with other things that have happened in the last 2-3 years, also a talent crisis, or maybe it's too much to call it like that. But when you see the numbers in terms of the amount of people that are leaving, as you say, and the amount of people that need to be found and onboarded and retained, that is a very big challenge. And we see that that brings the requirement to, on one side, make technology more accessible to perhaps older generations, but also the whole topic around retention and how can you make people enjoy their work a lot more, and also enable their work and speed up their development is really important. And also onboarding, how can you bring people quicker into the workforce in manufacturing when you need to learn standard operating procedures and things like that. Technology can really help shorten those cycles of onboarding. And in terms of, I suppose, disruptive things or trends that might change that, I think we're at the point where things are really changing again, possibly even more than during the pandemic. If you see the latest developments around AI technology, and in particular large language models, I think that is very specific to how people interact with technology and how accessible technology is. So I think we're right at the beginning of another big transformation on how, the value of frontline workers, their role in digital transformation, and how technology can enable them. Yeah,
very, very interesting. Sarah, I mean, obviously you work broadly across all sectors. Is what Lena's saying there applicable to other sectors as well?
Absolutely, but I think Lena's spot on. And I think you mentioned before that this particular population for, manufacturing factory workers, it can be a specific challenge to help them see what's in it for them, so that they adopt the technology and ultimately get that value out of it. And so there's so many things organizations can do to help their workers feel comfortable with the technology, get ready for the change, but also see what's in it for them, that it's actually improving their lives, and sort of meet the challenge. Because Lena touched on how, we're already in the age of AI. We're already starting to see the value coming from, the next and the next and the next generation of technology. So we need to make sure that workers are equipped for what we have to offer now, and that they can sort of meet the challenges technology advances in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we've lived it in manufacturing. I'm not that familiar with other sectors, but in manufacturing, we've always had this fear of technology from the first industrial revolution with the Luddites. When you don't see and you don't kind of understand or are in touch with the technology, it almost seems like a threat. And there's a really big piece of work that we need to do very quickly in terms of showing the real benefits and what it looks like, kind of making it real for people. What could your job and your life in a way be like with this technology?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've been reading quite a lot around Industry 4.0, and there seems to be a lot of hype around sort of Industry 4.0 and how this is revolutionizing the way that companies, they manufacture, they improve, and distribute their products. But then I'm also reading sort of conflicting reports. For example, I think it was the Global Digital Operations Survey that PwC did put together, where there's still an overwhelming, almost sort of 2/3 of global manufacturing companies that are showing little or no enthusiasm for the idea of digital transformation. So, I mean, it seems like, given what's happening with employees now in particular and AI, and it seems like digital transformation can no longer really be avoided. What tips would you give to a manufacturing organization who have that mindset, who are essentially on the start of that digital transformation journey?
Go on, Sarah. You go first.
Well, I have a couple things. One is realizing that, Lena touched on retention and how the having sort of a extra need for keeping and finding really great employees. So thinking from that standpoint, it's starting to be a real point of advantage to be connecting your frontline workers with technology. So people who are choosing which manufacturing organization they want to work for are tending to choose the ones that value the employees enough to invest in connecting them, in hearing their ideas, in making their lives easier by automating things that are, that require less brain power so that they can focus more on what matters. That's beneficial to the organization, but also to the worker. So I'd say that's the first point on what leaders can really focus in on. I would say the second point is being crystal clear on the business outcomes that you want to drive by connecting your workers. I cannot tell you how many times I've chatted with organizations who know it's a good thing and they know that there are benefits to be had, but haven't yet really thought through the specific goals that they're trying to reach. Because, and this is the third point, once you get crystal clear on those goals, you can start illustrating to the worker the what's in it for me as it relates to those goals. So of course you want to keep the business outcome at the forefront when you're planning what sort of adoption change management you're doing, but understanding the changes then that would be required from the worker's point of view, and then the benefit to the worker that results from those changes, and illustrating that to them through really consistent communication, not just from their line manager, but also from their organizational leader. That's when you start getting really, really powerful from an adoption change management point of view. Go ahead, Lena.
No, 100%. You stole my thunder. No, I would just add two things to that. 100% agree with kind of being very value-driven and outcome-driven and understanding those secondary outcomes that might not be direct, but retention and things like that are really important. The only two things I would add to that is the realization that actually sustainability from an environmental point of view and from a people point of view, those outcomes are going to become increasingly important. So thinking about the long-term success of businesses more and more is going to involve also understanding how does my business have an impact on the environment and on people, and embedding that in the strategy. And the other thing is, nobody can do this alone. These projects are big, and it's really important to have internal outcomes clear and understand what organizations need to achieve. But also it's really important to find the right partners and evolve that strategy together with partners. Then you can start feeding into what you want to achieve. What are the possibilities enabled by the outside world? So I think that topic of partnering is really important as well.
Yeah, very insightful. We touched a little bit there on adoption. Again, this from your Work Trend Index report that I mentioned earlier. I think 41% of the frontline workers that were surveyed that were in a non-management position say they don't have the right technology to do their job effectively, and 46% will worry that they could lose their jobs if they don't adapt to new technology. So there's clearly, on the one hand, there's a clearly a distinct role that technology can play. It is playing to an extent, but there's obviously a huge gap in an adoption, and it's what seems to be like a real skills gap. And I know that digital skills gap is prevalent actually across all industries, but I mean, how much, what are some of those adoption challenges you've seen with frontline technologies, maybe some of the technologies that you own yourselves in Microsoft, but also when we're talking about that skills gap, how big do you believe the lack of data literacy is, because these workers just haven't, they're not information workers, they just haven't been exposed to data the same way as, people like, ourselves?
Yeah, so this is a question that comes up a lot. And again, it's kind of rooted in the fact that workers historically have not been equipped with technology. So therefore, it's never been an expectation before. It's sort of new, right, to be equipped with digital tools like an app on your phone, or just even being given an email so that people can reach you. So your first question was, what are some of the adoption change management issues we face? Well, it's that workers don't really see the what's in it for them, whereas we know there's plenty that's in it for them. One, which I've talked about, is really robust, work-life balance, where suddenly, instead of using their own social media to communicate with their manager or just their own instant messaging service, now they can do it through a work app that they can silence after their shift, right? And that silence is golden, right? Because it means that they have true work-life balance. That's just one example of many, many, many benefits that are the what's in it for them, for the worker. And so that's what I keep saying is, to help them see what's in it for them. I'd also just acknowledge that not all workers who work on a factory floor may have a smartphone to use that technology. So that's where you start seeing shared devices come into play, so that if you equip the factory floor with, say, a couple shared devices that people can log on to their account, see what they need to see, get those benefits, and feel like they're being connected. Maybe they can see their pay slip rather than waiting for it in the mail. Another what's in it for me. So equipping organizations with shared devices for their workers is also a way that you can start illustrating to the worker the what's in it for them without them feeling like it's such an imposition. And that's how you start getting some real momentum. The last thing I'll say is recruiting champions. And you know what? Usually the person who was most resistant at the beginning becomes the loudest and most enthusiastic champion. And what does that require? It requires listening to the frontline worker, to these people who are on the factory floor. So going back to getting really pointy about those business challenges that you want to solve, I always tell leaders and organizations, as high up as you can go, if you can get those people, those decision makers in rooms with frontline workers to really have a discussion about what they would like to see or what their life is like currently and how it can be improved, that's when the dialogue really opens up and you can start making really big headway for adoption.
Yeah, that's
I would agree with that. And there's a very strong cultural element in all of that, and is that empowerment. We use a lot the word empowering people, and empowering is not just giving people the tools, but actually getting them to own them as well, and driving. Ultimately, they know their jobs best. So how can we give people also the ownership to drive the digital transformation? And suddenly it's not just something done to you, but you doing things to help your career. And the other thing you asked was around skills and talking about career. Actually, I think there's a big conversation around, one, how can technology accelerate careers? You don't just replace people by technology at all. Actually, you bring technology, and talent is so precious, and skills and knowledge and people driving the business is, how can you lift them up at the same time as you bring technology? And I think there's a big thing around, what are the skills that are important to have, and I think we need to also rethink, what does data literacy or digital literacy mean with all of the technologies coming, and making sure that people are taking or acquiring the skills that are really core to the business and valuable to the business. We don't need to spend loads of time. Just an example, learning how to build a Power BI report. It might take you 7 hours when you can have Copilot now building that report for you. And it's just a small example of the same thing that can be much bigger across the organization.
Yeah, no, totally. I think I was reading somewhere on a McKinsey report recently that actually the number one sort of priority for frontline workers is career progression. And, that obviously in most instances that may be relative to an increase in remuneration, but actually, if someone is able to, continue on a career path, that's going to meet their fundamental needs. And a lot of that comes down to, actually knowing what opportunities there are in the business, what skills are required for me to be able to move into that role. These fundamental needs of just actually having the right information to know, how to do their job better, how to move throughout the business, how to maybe, make a more positive impact in some of their sort of day-to-day tasks through real-time dashboards. I think it's going to be really crucial in facilitating that sort of change management and adoption of the myriad of technologies that frontline workers are being introduced.
Can I add to that, Luke, for a second on sort of the tools for digital literacy? We find that it's inherent to employee engagement to have a really, really robust learning platform, one where they can not only advance their careers just in their own skill set, right? So you mentioned that that's their number one concern, is progressing through the organization, but also giving them exposure to other jobs that might sit within the organization so that you can increase that retention number. And the second thing is how frontline workers might need learning in a format that's different from people like us who, sit at a desk where they don't have the time really to go through a long training module. You really want those bite-sized learnings, ones that can be accessible maybe between shifts or on the go. And so keeping in mind format as well as content is really essential for the frontline.
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, we're finding new use cases with how organizations are, using the screens on their walls to facilitate, sharing job options, sharing information around skills, and then also, delivering some of those learning and development experiences that were typically delivered through, more conventional means for information workers. So, I think it seems like, we're seeing how quickly that sort of evolution of digital transformation in the frontline workplace is happening. I think actually that leads quite nicely into my next question is what do you see as sort of like an integrated digital employee experience looking like on the front line, given that, in particular, these workers, as we touched on, typically won't have a company device. They won't, in a lot of instances, have a company email. So, how do you foresee an integrated digital experience sort of looking like on the front line? And I guess how is Microsoft making that a reality?
I think I'll leave this one to Sarah. It's probably right in her
Sure, yes. So there's a couple of things. One is making employees feel heard. And that's specific to their role. So having a real scalable way to take in feedback and then applying that feedback. So, when you think of Microsoft's technology in Teams, for example, we have apps that really help organizations collate and summarize the type of feedback that they'd want to get from a frontline worker versus what probably exists today, if anything, which is like a suggestion box, right? So already you start to feel like workers are able to submit feedback in real time while they're on the factory floor. Another might be things like, we talked about Power BI, but really just displaying data in real time that they can act on. And not only just the data itself, but connecting the data to actions that can make a real difference in a factory floor from an efficiency point of view, but also helping the worker sort of troubleshoot all the faster. You talked about, I love how much you've quoted the Work Trend Index, but I actually think just communication from the head office is another form of integration, especially if you can make it specific to the geography of the worker. If there's, several factory locations, specific to their job, specific to the language that they are used to reading in. And so all those things make it much more integrated to their day-to-day. So 62% of all frontline workers feel like leadership doesn't prioritize building a culture. And that's one of those ways you can really switch that flip really quickly by giving targeted communications that's specific to their role. But I'm just thinking there's so many ways you can integrate, and it starts to get really specific to the organization. But in the world of manufacturing, it can look as simple as automating tasks that should not require like a manual physical person doing them, so that they can instead start getting into more and more activities that add real value to the organization. So as Lena said, it's not about replacing jobs. It's about helping the workers that you have get to more high value activities. And that's the opportunity that we're looking at here, so that organizations really see the benefit, not just from the initial rollout, but through in the future, it compounds, in fact.
Yeah. And I think for us at Microsoft, Teams is really the center of it. How can we integrate everything through Teams and present everything through Teams and help people interact and communicate using not tangential technology, but other technology through Teams. And there are a couple of really good examples around this. For example, us providing Power Platform and Power Apps through Teams as well, not just separately. But even 2 weeks ago, I was at Hannover Messe, at one of the biggest manufacturing shows in the world in Hanover. And we announced a new development we have with Siemens. That's one of our partners in engineering. And one of the things we're doing is trying to integrate all of the Siemens tools with Teams as well. So if you're in the factory floor and you need to record, for example, a fault for a product, you're not just writing it on a piece of paper or a form, you're actually recording it through Teams and sending it directly to the Siemens Team Center tool that is in charge of engineering and the right individuals who can actually do something about the problem. So for us, in terms of a single integrated experience, it all centers around Teams, and we work very closely with partners like you as well at ScreenCloud to do that.
Brilliant. And I guess that leads me on to sort of my final question, which is a question I ask all guests, which is, what do you predict or hope the future of work on the front line will look like in 2040? So I know we've sort of touched a little bit on that in terms of sort of what the integrated digital employee experience looks like. I know we're a while away from achieving that, but 2040, what's that sort of utopian view for the future of work on the front line? Maybe start with you, Lena.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Is probably the most difficult question, but if you think about 2040, I think you said that's 17 years away. And if we think 17 years back, we were even before the smartphones were launched with the iPhone. And if you think about how that has changed things in 17 years, it's really transformational. And I think for me, we're at the beginning of one of those cycles with AI and the shape that AI is taking in terms of helping people interact in a completely different way with technology. And I think there's, don't want to get too technical, but there's a term that Satya Nadella, our CEO, uses that's called tech intensity. And that's a measure of how quickly can organizations adopt technology, and then how quickly can they use it to achieve their own outcomes and actually become a digital organization. And I think things like this are completely going to not just change what we can achieve in terms of tech intensity, but the speed. So I think by 2040, I would expect that a lot more companies, certainly in our sectors, are embracing the role as digital organizations and not just manufacturing organizations, and people being at the center of that. And there'll be, I can't answer that, but the really exciting things for me, or one of the most exciting things, was going to be to see how the roles evolve alongside technology.
Awesome.
Yeah. So for me, from the perspective of the worker, I could see, a frontline worker waking up and being able to understand what their shift is going to look like, what they need to do to prepare for their day. Maybe it'll be on a smartphone. Who knows what it'll be on. I can also see that someone arrives at work and is already finding new efficiencies that helps their organization grow and be more efficient. So if you look at that and multiply it by numbers of workers, you can start really getting excited about how many efficiencies emerge just from what employees see on the factory floor. You could also see employees making their own Power Apps or their own automation so that they can start working on the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. So really my excitement comes from the empowerment that we provide to frontline workers, and then in turn, what that means for the organization as they see the benefits in the future. So it's kind of amorphous, but that's because there's so much that organizations stand to benefit. It really comes down to what sort of custom solution they start to implement, and then the rest just kind of flies from there.
Brilliant. Well, lots to look forward to. And obviously with ScreenCloud, we're going through the motions to become a strategic partner with Microsoft. So, again, we're really excited of partnering with you, and really the main objective there is to try and achieve some of the things that we've discussed today, and really enable frontline workers, to get more, be more proficient with what they do, improve that employee experience, and ultimately, make sure that the frontline keeps up with the technical revolution that's happening at the moment. So thank you both for joining today. It's been great conversation, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you
for having us.